It was 7:42 p.m. when my son slammed his wine glass on my kitchen counter, shards glittering like tiny knives under the harsh light. His face was flushed, his eyes sharp with contempt, as he pointed at me like I was some stranger who'd betrayed him. You know what, Mom? Sometimes I wish Charlotte had raised me instead of you. At least then I'd know what real class looks like. Charlotte, his mother-in-law, the woman who floated into our lives 3 years ago trailing the scent of designer perfume and flashing a smile polished by privilege. The same woman I'd endured countless condescending remarks from while babysitting my grandkids so she and her daughter could sip champagne in Napa. The words didn't just sting, they detonated inside me. My son, the boy I raised alone after his father disappeared without a trace, standing there in my kitchen telling me I wasn't enough. That another woman should have been his mother. He expected tears, apologies, maybe the usual soft landing I'd always given him, but that night something inside me fractured clean through, not into weakness, but into steel. And that steel was about to change everything. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the wine glass back at him. I didn't even flinch when those words came out of Ethan's mouth. Sometimes I wish Charlotte had raised me instead of you. I simply stood there, hands damp from the dish towel, and looked straight into my son's face, the same face I once kissed 1,000 times when it was sticky with peanut butter and innocence. Well, I said, laying the towel on the counter as deliberately as a surgeon setting down a scalpel. That's certainly an interesting perspective. He froze. That flicker of hesitation. Oh, I noticed it. He expected the tears, the begging, the familiar, I'm sorry, sweetheart, I didn't mean to upset you. But that woman, she no longer existed. Mom, I didn't mean, oh, I think you meant exactly what you said, Ethan. I interrupted, my voice calm and cold as an Iowa winter. And you know what? You're probably right. Charlotte probably would have done a much better job. He stared at me like he didn't know who I was anymore. And truthfully, neither did I, because in that moment, something inside me cracked clean through, not into weakness, but into steel. While Ethan gathered his coat and muttered some weak excuse about an early meeting in Ashwood, I stood silently committing every detail to memory. The tailored jacket that probably cost more than my mortgage payment. The smug confidence of a man who'd never had to wonder if his lights would stay on, because I'd always made sure they did. And now, this man, my only child, the boy I had bled for, broken my back for, was telling me another woman, a woman who glided through life on a cushion of privilege and platinum credit cards, would have made him better. When the door finally closed behind him, the silence in my house was deafening. I sank into the chair at the kitchen table, staring at the scratches in the wood where Ethan had once carved his initials as a teenager. My hands shook not with rage, but with something far colder resolve. Because here's a truth people like Ethan don't understand: when you spend your entire life handing someone everything, they start to believe they deserve it. They start to believe you don't matter. That night, I decided to remind my son, who built his empire brick by brick, and to show him exactly what happens when you bite the hand that fed you. While the pot roast cooled on the counter, I thought back to the years I'd spent clawing our way out of poverty. I was 24 when I had Ethan. His father, Luke Collins, took one look at the screaming newborn in my arms and bolted, leaving nothing but a note and a pile of overdue bills. From that moment on, it was me and Ethan against the world. I worked mornings at the diner, afternoons, scrubbing floors at Ashwood State Bank, and nights typing medical transcripts at the kitchen table while Ethan slept. I kept a notebook of bills and dreams, one side tracking what I owed the other, listing what I wanted for him. Better shoes, so he wouldn't be teased. Piano lessons when his second grade teacher said he had an ear for music. A down payment for a modest two-bedroom in a decent neighborhood, so he wouldn't grow up listening to arguments through thin apartment walls. When he made varsity basketball, I sat in the front row of every game, even if it meant leaving work early and risking my job. When prom rolled around, I worked double shifts for 2 months just so his tux would fit like a prince's. And when college applications came and he set his heart on Northwestern, a school whose tuition made me physically nauseous, I signed a second mortgage on the house and sold the last heirloom my mother had left me. For 4 years, I lived on ramen noodles and the grace of caffeine while wiring him $800 a month for books, trips, unexpected expenses. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every bone deep exhaustion, I carried it gladly because I believed in him. And now, decades later, standing in my kitchen with wine pooling on the counter like blood, I realized he didn't remember any of it. Or worse, he did, and he didn't care. Charlotte Hale. The name sounded expensive, like a brand of champagne. She entered Ethan's life, and by extension mine 3 years ago, sweeping in with her designer handbags, her polished charm, her laugh that carried the hollow ring of someone who'd never worried about overdraft fees. She became the sun around which Ethan and Sophie's world revolved, hosting wine tastings, planning ski trips, booking summers in Martha's Vineyard, while I stayed behind in my modest Ashwood bungalow, watching my grandkids so they could sip cocktails oceans away. To Ethan, Charlotte wasn't just a mother in law, she was a lifestyle, a status symbol, proof that he'd made it far beyond the girl from Cedar Falls who raised him on secondhand clothes and Sunday night casseroles. I didn't hate Charlotte, not at first. I pitied her in a way so desperate to project perfection that she probably couldn't remember who she was under all that gloss. But the night Ethan spoke her name like a weapon, everything changed. If he wanted Charlotte to be his mother, I'd give him exactly what he asked for. Only he wouldn't like how it felt. The morning after Ethan's little declaration, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, my life wasn't about what he needed. It was about what I wanted. And what I wanted was simple, the truth. You see people like Charlotte. They leave breadcrumbs, social media posts, bragging rights disguised as casual conversation. And I'd been watching her long enough to know that some of those breadcrumbs didn't add up. So I started digging. At first, casually Googling her real estate transactions, checking public property records, scanning through her curated Instagram feed of yacht selfies and charity galas. But I wanted more than surface level dirt. I wanted roots. So I did something I never imagined I'd do. At 68 years old, I hired a private investigator. His name was Marcus Tate, ex-cop. Discreet, expensive enough to be good, cheap enough for me to afford if I cashed out the last of my savings bonds. "What exactly are you looking for?" he asked over coffee at a diner. 2 towns over, his voice gravelly with too many years and too much whiskey. The truth I said simply. Who Charlotte Hale really is. Where her money really comes from. And anything in her past that doesn't match the fairy tale she's selling my son. Marcus studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "You're not looking to blackmail her." "No," I said, stirring cream into my coffee with slow precision. "I'm looking to ruin her, completely." While Marcus did his digging, I played my part, the invisible grandmother. I volunteered for more babysitting weekends, lingered in their Ashwood home just long enough to overhear snippets of Charlotte's phone calls to notice the tiny tells. Most people missed the way her smile twitched when Sophie mentioned money, the tension in her voice when Ethan bragged about a deal she'd supposedly helped him land. And slowly a pattern emerged. Charlotte wasn't just controlling, she was desperate. The designer gowns, leased. The luxury vacations paid on credit. The real estate success she boasted about inflated numbers and a network of shady side deals. She was living a life built on borrowed time and borrowed money. The kind of secret that, if exposed, would implode not just her reputation, but the very foundation of Ethan's marriage. Perfect. Because my goal wasn't just to destroy Charlotte, it was to dismantle the illusion Ethan had built around her, the illusion that made him forget who held him through scarlet fevers and broken hearts. When Marcus called 6 weeks later and said, "You might want to sit down for this," I knew the real game was about to begin. Marcus called on a Thursday afternoon, his voice clipped serious. "Mrs. Collins, we need to meet. Today." My heart didn't race, it didn't even flutter. Instead, it settled into a slow, deliberate thud, like a drumbeat calling me to war. We met at the same diner corner booth, chipped formica table smell of stale coffee and fried bacon hanging in the air. Marcus slid a thick manila folder toward me like it was a live grenade. "Before you open that," he said, his eyes sharp, "understand something. Once you see what's inside, you can't unsee it." And the minute you act on it, there's no going back. I crossed that bridge the night my son told me Charlotte should have been his mother, I said calmly. He gave a short nod. Fair enough. The folder felt heavier than paper should. I flipped it open, and with every page, the Charlotte Hale I thought I knew disintegrated like ash in the wind. Page 1, a credit report showing Charlotte drowning in debt, maxed out credit cards, second mortgages stacked like dominoes car loans with ballooning interest. Her so called wealth, a castle built on sand. Page 2, a bankruptcy filing from 15 years ago under a different name. Beverly Ann Kowalski, trailer park address in Indiana, married once before to a man who bailed after her gambling habit torpedoed their finances. Page 3, two separate arrests for embezzlement in her 20s, both cases resolved through restitution and plea bargains. Not guilty by technicality. I kept flipping, each document more damning than the last tax liens court judgment's shady shell companies. Her entire life was a performance stitched together with other people's money and forged signatures. When I finally looked up, Marcus was watching me like a bomb technician, waiting to see if I had cut the wrong wire. She's a fraud, I said softly. She's a professional liar, Marcus corrected, and she's running out of rope. If she doesn't pull another miracle in the next 6 months, she's going under. Hard. How many people know about this? Just me, and now you. I closed the folder with a snap that made Marcus flinch. Then let's make sure Ethan knows it too. You can't just walk into your son's house waving a folder like this. He'd dismiss it as jealousy, a desperate play for relevance. No, this required strategy, precision. I started small, subtle. The next weekend, when I babysat Madison and Connor, I accidentally left my phone unlocked on the counter with an article open financial fraud among high-end realtors. Nothing with Charlotte's name, just a headline designed to plant a seed. Later, as Sophie scrolled Instagram in the kitchen, I struck up a conversation. Your mom must be under a lot of stress, I said, casually wiping down the counter. Sophie glanced up. What makes you say that? Oh, nothing, just the market's rough for real estate right now. I read agents sometimes take out big loans just to keep up appearances. Must be hard, all those expectations. She laughed, but it sounded brittle. Mom's fine, she always is, but her eyes flickered just for a second. That was all I needed. The next move was riskier. I sent an anonymous envelope to Charlotte's brokerage copies of her bankruptcy records and a polite note. Thought you should know who's handling your client's trust accounts. In real estate, reputation isn't everything, it's the only thing. Within a week, whispers began. By week 2, Charlotte was on leave pending an internal review. And just like that, the first crack appeared in her perfect facade. Cracks spread fast in a world built on image. Charlotte's friends, the wine-tasting country club, sensed weakness like sharks smell blood. Invitations dried up, brunch plans evaporated. Her Instagram, once a parade of champagne, flutes, and curated sunsets, went dark. Sophie called me one night, her voice tight. Mom's been different lately, snapping at everyone. Dad says she's worried about work, but she won't talk about it. I murmured something sympathetic, all while picturing Charlotte pacing her designer kitchen wine glass in hand, realizing the empire she built on lies was collapsing. But the sweetest part, I wasn't done. Not even close. Marcus had given me more than paper. He'd given me text messages between Charlotte and Sophie, messages that dripped with entitlement and manipulation. If Ethan really loves you, he'll help us. It's about family loyalty. Play the guilt card. Remind him what we've done for his business. If he resists, threaten to take the kids. Men like him hate losing their perfect family image. I didn't send them to Ethan, not yet. Timing is everything. Instead, I printed them, sealed them in a heavy cream envelope, and tucked it in the back of my desk drawer like a weapon waiting for war. Because this wasn't just about humiliation, it was about education. My son was about to learn the most brutal truth of all. The woman he idolized didn't just want to replace me, she wanted to ruin him. And when that lesson hit, it was going to hit like a sledgehammer. Charlotte's empire didn't collapse overnight. It unraveled slowly like silk threads, pulling loose from a designer hem one at a time until the whole thing puddled in disgrace. First came the whispers, then the canceled listings. By the time her brokerage announced an internal compliance review, she was bleeding clients faster than she could pour herself another glass of Pinot Grigio. And when the money stopped flowing, so did the mask. It was a Tuesday when Ethan called me. I recognized the tone before I even heard the words. The brittle edge of a man whose perfect world had started to crack. Mom, he said, no preamble, just my name, like an SOS flare. Can I come by this weekend? Of course, sweetheart. Everything okay? A bitter laugh. Not really, it's complicated. Complicated was an understatement. By the time he walked through my door on Saturday, my once impervious son looked like he'd been hollowed out and left in the sun. Dark circles, jaw tight, the same hands that once clutched a basketball now twisted his wedding ring like a lifeline. What's going on? I asked gently, pouring coffee into the same chipped mug he'd used as a teenager. He hesitated. Then the truth came out in jagged pieces. Charlotte's marriage imploding. Richard had discovered her creative accounting, a polite term for financial treachery, and was lawyering up. There was talk of fraud charges, bankruptcy, maybe prison time, and Sophie. She turned into Charlotte's echo chamber, parroting phrases like family loyalty, and you owe us every time Ethan resisted another demand for money. She wants us to give her $50,000, Ethan said, staring into his coffee like it might hold the answer. Just a loan until this blows over. She says it's about family. I raised an eyebrow. 50,000? Interesting number. He frowned. Why? Oh, nothing, I said lightly, though the irony tasted sweet as honey on my tongue. 50,000, the same amount he'd begged from me years ago, promising it was temporary. The loan he never repaid. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't look invincible. He looked human, scared, ashamed. I don't know what to do, Mom, he admitted, his voice cracking just enough to remind me of the boy who once scraped his knee on the playground and ran to me for comfort. If I help Charlotte, we risk everything I've built. If I don't, Sophie says I'm abandoning her family, she said. He swallowed hard. She said maybe we should separate for a while. I set my cup down with deliberate care. What does your gut tell you that Charlotte's toxic and I should stay as far away from her as possible? His laugh was hollow, but Sophie can't see it. She still thinks her mom walks on water. People aren't always what they seem, I said softly. Sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal someone's true character. Ethan looked at me, then really looked, and for a flicker of a second I saw it. Recognition, the ghost of gratitude, maybe even regret. But ghosts fade fast when you're drowning. Mom, he whispered, what if I lose everything you already did, I thought. You just don't know it yet. I could have left him twisting in the wind a little longer, could have let Charlotte wring him dry before stepping in. But timing, as Marcus liked to remind me, is everything. So that night, after Ethan left with his shoulders sagging under the weight of a life unraveling, I made a choice. I pulled the cream-colored envelope from the back of my desk drawer, the one holding Charlotte's dirtiest secrets, and those poisonous text messages Sophie thought would never see daylight. The next morning it was on Ethan's doorstep. No note, no explanation, just the truth gift-wrapped in devastation. He called 2 days later, his voice shaking with a fury that wasn't aimed at me this time. Did you send me this? What is it? I asked mildly. Don't play games. Mom, the texts, the records, the stuff about her real name, Beverly Kowalski. His voice cracked. They were planning to manipulate me, to threaten our marriage if I didn't give her money. I stayed silent long enough for the words to settle like shards in his throat. Why would I have access to something like that? Because this isn't random, he shot back. This is thorough, professional. It cost money you'd never spend unless you had a damn good reason. I smiled even though he couldn't see it. My son wasn't stupid, just spoiled. And if I did, I asked softly, what then? A pause, then quietly, I'd want to know why, because I said my voice like tempered steel. Sometimes the truth hurts, but it saves you from something far worse. By the end of the week, Ethan had confronted Sophie. The fight was volcanic, shouts slammed doors, accusations hurled like grenades. She defended her mother with a ferocity that bordered on delusion. When Ethan showed her the text, the color drained from her face. But denial is a powerful drug. They're out of context, she insisted. Mom was just stressed. You've never liked her. No, Ethan snapped, his voice low and lethal. I've never liked being manipulated. That was the last real conversation they had as husband and wife. The divorce petition landed on his desk a week later. And me, I didn't gloat, not out loud, but inside I savored every delicious note of irony. The woman who was supposed to outshine me had dragged my son into the gutter. The wife who stood by her mother's schemes had detonated her own marriage. And Ethan, the man who once told me I wasn't enough, was about to find out exactly how much he needed me. 3 weeks after the envelope detonated Ethan's perfect life, my phone lit up with his name at 10:47 p.m. The hour alone told me everything. Nothing good ever happens after midnight. I answered anyway. Mom, his voice rasped raw and frayed. I need to talk, please. Those words, please, I hadn't heard them in years. Come by tomorrow, I said calmly, as if I didn't already know his world was on fire. When he walked through my door the next morning, the transformation was startling. Gone was the polished executive who once lectured me about real class. In his place stood a man, unshaven shoulders sagging under the weight of his own hubris. What happened, I asked, though. The answer was written all over his face. She filed, he whispered. Sophie filed for divorce. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where he'd once thrown those words like knives and spilled everything. Charlotte's implosion had gone nuclear. Richard filed for divorce, freezing their joint accounts. Charlotte, desperate, had turned to Sophie, who turned to Ethan. When he refused to bankroll their fantasy, the mother-daughter alliance turned on him like wolves. She wants the house, he said bitterly. Half the business. Full custody of the kids. His laugh was hollow. She says I'm unstable, that I've been hiding money. Her lawyers are making me out to be some kind of financial predator. I stirred my coffee slowly. Are you? He glared. Of course not. Good. Then you'll have no problem proving it. Mom. His voice cracked a sound I hadn't heard since he was 10 years old, and his puppy died. I'm going to lose everything. My kids, my business, everything I worked for. I let the silence stretch until it pressed down like a weight. Then, softly, you already did. His head snapped up. You lost it the night you stood in my kitchen and told me Charlotte should have been your mother. I continued, my tone flat as steel. You lost it when you borrowed $50,000 from me and never paid it back. You lost it when you treated me like a servant while worshiping a woman who's now circling the drain. I know, he whispered. God, Mom, I know I was wrong about everything. Words are cheap, I said, setting down my spoon with a quiet clink. If you want help, it comes with conditions. His eyes narrowed. What conditions? I leaned forward, folding my hands like a judge delivering a sentence. You pay me back, every dime, with interest. And until then, you do exactly what I tell you when I tell you. No arguments, no excuses. He swallowed hard. Anything else? Yes, I let the pause slice the air. You move back here, into my house. You want your kids. You want to look like a stable parent in front of a judge. Then you park your ego at the curb and live under my roof until I say otherwise. The silence that followed was electric. For a heartbeat, the old arrogance flared in his eyes. But then he thought of his children, of losing them to Sophie and Charlotte, and the fight drained out of him like air from a punctured tire. Okay, he said finally, his voice a rasp of surrender. Whatever you want. I smiled slow and sharp. Good boy. Watching Ethan carry his suitcase into my guest room felt like watching the axis of the earth tilt. This was the man who once bragged about his Ashwood address now unfolding shirts into a room barely big enough for a twin bed and a thrift store dresser. This is temporary, he muttered like an incantation. Everything is temporary, I replied sweetly. Your marriage, your business deals, your illusions about Charlotte. I paused in the doorway, my voice soft as a blade. The question is whether you learn anything before it ends. The next morning, I laid down the rules, like scripture. 1. Breakfast on the table by 7. 2. Homework with the kids every night. 3. Household chores without complaint. Nothing extravagant. just enough to remind him that for the first time in decades, the power balance had shifted. And oh, how quickly the cracks appeared. Watching Ethan scrub my kitchen floor knees on tile designer watch, glinting under fluorescent light, wasn't just satisfying, it was justice polished to a shine. The first week Ethan moved in felt like a hostage negotiation where the hostage didn't know he'd already signed the surrender papers. He cooked breakfast because I told him to. He folded laundry because I left it on his bed. He smiled through clenched teeth as neighbors waved from their porches, probably wondering why Ashwood's golden boy was hauling groceries into his mother's modest bungalow. But something shifted the night Madison cried. It was late past 10. I'd gone to bed, but voices woke me soft at first, then sharp like broken glass. I padded to the hallway and stopped just short of the kids' room. I don't want to go back there. Madison's voice cracked like a branch in winter. Mom says I have to choose between you and her. I don't want to choose Daddy. For a long moment's silence. Then Ethan's voice low and shaking. You don't have to choose baby. I'm never leaving you again. Do you hear me? Never. I pressed my back to the wall, heart clenched tight. For the first time, his words sounded less like promises and more like vows forged in fire. The custody battle loomed like a storm front. Schuyler, guided by Charlotte's venom, was gunning for full custody. Her lawyers painted Ethan as unstable, manipulative, financially reckless. But I had ammunition they didn't know existed. The text messages, the financial records, the recordings of Charlotte coaching Sophie to weaponize the kids. My attorney, Rebecca Martinez, a shark in heels, spread the evidence across my dining table like a war map. This isn't just a custody case, she said, tapping a manicured nail on Charlotte's text. It's character assassination. They're trying to bury him. Then we fight, I said, my voice steady as bedrock. Ethan swallowed hard. Mom, if this goes public, it will, I cut in, and you'll survive it, because you're going to stop pretending you're invincible and start acting like a father worth fighting for. For the first time, he didn't argue. The courtroom smelled like cold coffee and desperation. Sophie sat at one table, her lawyer whispering in her ear, her posture rigid with manufactured outrage. Behind her, Charlotte perched like a vulture in pearls, thinner now brittle her mask, cracking under the fluorescent lights. Ethan sat beside me, shoulders squared, jaw tight. When the judge called his name, he rose slowly like a man carrying a lifetime on his back. Mr. Collins, the judge, said, "Do you have anything to add before I make my ruling?" I expected him to talk about stability, about financial security, about the children's routines. He didn't. He looked straight at the judge and then at me. I failed, he said simply. His voice didn't shake, not as a provider, as a son. I let pride blind me. I let people who didn't have my family's best interests steer my life, and it almost cost me my kids. Everything good in my life exists because of one person. The room tilted. My breath caught. My mother, he said, his voice rough with truth. She's the reason I'm standing here instead of drowning. She gave me everything, and I repaid her with disrespect. That ends today. I can't change what I said to her, but I can prove that I've learned what really matters. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was electric. For the first time, I saw the man I'd hoped Ethan would become, not polished, not perfect, but real. When the judge granted primary custody to Ethan and restricted Charlotte's access, Sophie's face crumpled like wet paper. Charlotte didn't flinch. She just stared at me with eyes full of poison and defeat. And I smiled, sweet, small, victorious. 2 months after the ruling, my house was quiet again, too quiet. The kids' laughter no longer echoed down the hall. Ethan had rented a small townhouse nearby, a place he could afford, a place big enough for Madison's posters and Connor's Lego kingdoms. He came by every Sunday for dinner, carrying stories and bags of groceries like peace offerings. And every Sunday he said the same thing before he left. I'm not done paying you back. The checks started small, just enough to make a dent, but they came with handwritten notes that meant more than the money. Thank you for fighting for me when I didn't deserve it. Thank you for saving my kids from chaos. Thank you for not letting me drown. Words he'd never spoken before, words I'd waited a lifetime to hear. Charlotte didn't go quietly. Women like her never do. She clawed at every remaining shred of her fabricated life until there was nothing left but headlines and handcuffs. Fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. The day I saw her mugshot a hollow-eyed woman in County Orange, I felt nothing. No triumph, no pity, just a bone-deep certainty that justice, in all its cold precision, had done its work. As for Sophie, she learned what happens when you let someone else script your life. She moved into a cramped apartment across town, working a receptionist job, fighting for supervised visitation. The Instagram perfect world she built on Charlotte's lies evaporated like smoke. Ethan wasn't the same man who once stood in my kitchen spitting poison about real class. That man was gone, burned to ash in the fire of his own mistakes. This new man, he showed up for his kids, for himself, for me. He coached Connor's soccer team. He sat front row at Madison's debate tournament. He traded champagne networking events for bedtime stories and late-night grocery runs. And every time he looked at me, there was something new in his eyes. Respect, gratitude, love that wasn't performative, it was raw, earned, and real. People ask if I feel vindicated, if destroying Charlotte, dismantling Sophie's illusions, and reclaiming my son's loyalty was worth the scorched earth it left behind. Here's the truth. Revenge wasn't the goal. It was the vehicle. The goal was survival, not mine, but theirs. Ethan, Madison, Connor. Because if I hadn't stepped in, they would have drowned in Charlotte's lies and Sophie's weakness. I did what mothers do. I protected my family, even when it required becoming the villain in someone else's story. And if I had to do it all over again, I'd be sharper, faster, merciless from the start. On Christmas Eve, Ethan brought the kids over. We ate pot roast at the same kitchen table where this war began. Madison handed me a gift, a photo of the three of them in a silver frame engraved with one word, family. Open mine, Ethan said softly. Inside the small box was a check for the last of what he owed me and a note that made my throat tighten. Debt paid. Lesson learned. Love earned. For the first time in months, I let myself cry. And for the first time in years, I believed my son when he said, "Thank you, Mom, for everything." I touched his hand firm and steady. "Don't thank me," I said. "Just don't forget." Because forgetting is where betrayal begins. And I'm done being forgotten. True love isn't about comfort or convenience, it's about accountability. For years, Ethan believed loyalty was a one-way street paved only when it benefited him. He learned the hard truth relationships collapse when respect erodes. You can't treat the people who built your foundation like disposable scaffolding and expect your world to stand. Margaret's story isn't just about revenge, it's about restoration. Sometimes love wears soft hands, sometimes it wears steel. When betrayal cuts deep, forgiveness isn't enough. Action is required. Setting boundaries, demanding respect. Teaching hard lessons, those aren't acts of cruelty. They're acts of courage. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this: gratitude is the currency of love. Pay it often, spend it freely. Because when you forget who sacrificed for you, life has a way of reminding you through storms, through losses, through the wreckage of what you thought was unbreakable. Think about your inner circle. Who stood by you when no one else did? Who gave without expecting anything back? Those people are rare and they deserve your recognition. Call your parents, thank your partner, hug your kids. And if pride's been keeping you silent, swallow it. Pride won't tuck you in when life falls apart. And if you're on the other side, taken for granted, overlooked, dismissed, don't wait for an apology to reclaim your worth. Set boundaries, speak truth, and if necessary, teach the lesson life refuses to deliver. Sometimes protecting your heart means sharpening your spine, because family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by loyalty.